Go ahead. Take it away.
Good morning. Recently, a Dutch root certificate authority, DigiNotar, a wholly owned subsidiary of Vasco, certified a domain public key for star.google.com. The only problem is that the key does not belong to Google. Said another way, Google does not know the associated private key. It is suspected that the private key is known to the rogue state of Iran. A user relying upon the certificate to ensure that they were talking only to Google might be talking to Iran instead. The existence of this certificate and possession of the associated private key might make it easier for a site to pose as Google. Reports suggest that DigiNotar's systems were breached and that their security was poor by any standard. Tragic standard for a part of our security infrastructure. The market has punished Vasco by putting them out of the certificate authority business. While DigiNotar has filed for protection under the bankruptcy laws, anyone who suffers demonstrable financial losses as a result of this compromise will likely have a cause of action against Vasco. It is significant that the certificate is in the name of star.google.com. The holder of this certificate might issue additional certificates for services ending in google.com. Moreover, most of us visit Google every day. Possession of such a certificate might be necessary to pose as Google, but it is not sufficient. One would also have to be able to get one's victim to use one's IP address. I leave it to you to figure out what entity might have sufficient power to do that. The TLS SSL public key infrastructure is the one that we rely upon for the integrity of the internet. While many consumers do not look for the S in HTTPS or notice the lock symbol indicating its use, it remains the basis of necessary public trust and confidence. Said another way, it works. There are more than 600 root certificate authorities in the SSL PKI. They are all trusted equally. The good side of this is that the more CAs, the better their opportunity to know their customers. The downside is that the more CAs, the lower our level of trust in any of them. One gets to be a member of this elite club by demonstrating their bona fides to a smaller club, that is the software vendors that implement SSL in their products, that is operating systems and browsers. While this is not quite the system foreseen by those that proposed the public key infrastructure, it has served us fairly well for more than a decade. Note that the breach of DigiNotar and the fraudulent certificates is not as bad as it might have been had it remained secret. Because it became public, those who decide that certificates issued by DigiNotar could be trusted have revoked that trust. Of course, that revocation involves updating all the operating systems and browsers in the world, a process that is expensive and will never be quite complete. Most of us have never made an active decision about what keys are to be trusted. Rather, we have simply accepted the default, and that default is that if the browser publisher or the operating system publisher trusts it, then we will trust it. As all of this demonstrates that a breach of essential security represents a threat not just to the brand, but also to the viability of the enterprise. One might argue that had Digitar been in a different business, damage might have been limited to the brand rather than putting the enterprise out of business. I'm going to argue that these issues do not constitute much of a change in risk to the average user. The fraudulent certificates demonstrate that the certificate revocation procedures that we are using do not scale well. Moreover, the sheer number of certificate authorities suggests that the identity of the applicant may not be well authenticated in every instance. Of course, we've lived with weak credentials for generations. In many cases, we compensate by asking for complementary credentials from two or more independent sources. For example, back when we still paid merchants with personal checks, the merchant might ask for a driver's license issued by the state and a major credit card issued by an oil company or a bank. These compensated for any weakness that might exist on either side. It demonstrates that it's not necessary for the PKI to be perfect to be useful. In any case, most of us will never see a fraudulent certificate. The issue is not so much fraud as a loss of necessary public trust and confidence in the system. In my childhood, many merchants would not accept large denominations of currency. Cashiers were not permitted to accept bills larger than a 20. There are still many merchants that will not accept checks or credit cards. Some, not to say many, consumers do not trust e-commerce. If all of this were not bad enough, we have Beast. One more demonstration that if one wants notice, not to say notoriety, it helps to give one's attack a clever name. Beast is a demonstration of a more efficient attack against a known vulnerability in TLS 1.0. As Bruce Schneier likes to say, crypto is harder than it looks. My mentor, Jonathan Osies, taught me that there are an infinite number of ways to implement crypto, most of them wrong. As a general rule, we don't take security advice or medical or legal advice from cryptographers. However, Rizzo and Duong's work has security significance. It would have had even more significance if it had been more timely, had it been done before we knew about the vulnerability and when TLS 1.0 was in wider use. While Beast is not even in the wild, the idea of it has already caused software vendors to address the vulnerability. Of course, all current client-side software automatically chooses later versions of TLS. Unfortunately, for reasons of backwards compatibility with servers that may not have been updated, much of our software still supports TLS 1.0 and will use it if that is all the server supports. Our colleague Bob Moskowitz hopes that this demonstration will finally put a nail in the coffin of TLS 1.0. We no longer need it. But the fact that it persists demonstrates how difficult it is to introduce or to remove bad stuff from the internet. It tends to persist for a very long time after we no longer use it, after it's really been replaced by something that's better. Keep in mind that while the attack takes place on the client side, the persistence of the vulnerability is a server-side problem. While it is not urgent, be sure that your servers have been updated to TLS 1.2. Taken together, these two events are a wake-up call. While they are not a reason to panic, they serve to remind us that few things are as precious as continued public trust and confidence in the security of the internet in general and TLS SSL in particular. While not fragile, once broken, the confidence might take a generation or two to repair. We need to look to the security of all of our enterprise and certification, but all of our enterprises and certification authorities in particular. If your business is part of the security infrastructure of the internet, then you have a particular burden on you to make sure that your systems are not breached. We need to rethink how we handle certificate revocations. The system that we are using will not scale well, and it is time that we update it and go with something more like certificate revocation lists or that other acronym for online certification verification. We need to be more diligent in keeping our servers current. While not sufficient, these steps are necessary for us to continue to be called professionals and to be paid the big bucks. Thank you, and see you next week.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Good talk. All right.